guys, since we left off on the last episode with the Fiero four-cylinder engine, we're just going to jump right into this video with the Fiero four-cylinder. Everything's been painted and primed. Everything's been primed and painted. Of course, you got to prime before you paint. And here we have every part of the engine, or almost every part. Everything that we need to assemble the engine as our first step toward trying to see if we can turn this car into an Indy. I've done all of the painting. I've got some heat staining going off on the exhaust manifold. We have our belt drive system completely painted and detailed. Everything's done except for the specific Fiero Indy decals that go onto the valve cover and the air cleaner, as I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to do that. So right now we're just going to go into assembling the block, and then we'll see what we're going to do about getting that Fiero Indy specific details and markings on this engine. So why don't we just get started with assembly? Okay, now if we start with the first step, the next thing we got to do is we've already done the engine halves and the oil pan, which are here attached. So now number 3 in the cylinder head is already done. So 4 is the valve cover they want us to attach. And let's look at the engine the right way and the valve cover. Seems a shame to cover up the detail of the rocker arms. I didn't paint them because we'll never see them again once this is attached. Now, there's a single peg right in the center of the cylinder head, which the 4-cylinder pegs right into. Very, very simple assembly. Even I couldn't screw that one up. We just have to make sure that it will pivot on that. So you have to make sure that you line up the valve cover and the curved side. Just line up the valve cover right to the cylinder block in the same shape. You can see how it's straight on one side and it's got a bunch of little ridges on the other side. Well, it's exactly the same on the valve cover and on the cylinder head. And I see some details I can paint. I'm trying to paint as many details as I can on this just to make it really visually interesting. I know that some of the details I'm painting are probably not even painted on the engine itself, but I think it's going to look cooler if I do it, so I'm going to paint it. And let me tell you a little bit of what I used on this. Now, this is done with the Mr. Hobby black primer. And then over that, I hit it with some Tamiya semi-gloss clear, just to give it a little bit of a shine so it's not totally flat. The exhaust manifold, you can see the heat staining effect I have on there. That's done in Vallejo steel. Did I use Vallejo steel for that? I did use steel for that. Yes, that's done in Vallejo steel, which is then painted over with all clad pale burnt metal, which is the goldish coloring on there. And then I used a little bit of Tamiya clear blue and a little Tamiya red just to give a little variations as far as the heat staining goes. Now, then on the bolts themselves, I used the Citadel Retributor Armor, which is this goldish brass type color, which I thought would look good on the bolts. May not be 100%, the way it was from the factory, but I think it just looks cool. I love highlighting the bolts on these parts because then it just makes it a lot more visually interesting for something that once you build it, you'll never see again. But I really enjoy doing all of this small detail work, such as the bolts on here, and then I used a little bit of the Citadel color. They call it Shade Null Oil. And this works good as a panel liner and as a shading medium. and it really does help to bring out the details on that. Basically what you would use the Tamiya panel liner for, but the Tamiya panel liner can sometimes be a little bit too strong as it's going in, and it'll soak into the paint if you don't have a gloss coat over it. And I didn't want to put a gloss coat on this, so the Shade Known Oil, which is an acrylic, just kind of is easy to work with and just flows over pretty much anything you put it on. The next part that I really had a lot of fun doing was the belt drive system. As you can see, I've highlighted all of the different pulleys. This was done in Mr. Hobby black primer, which kept the belts in flat black, and then all I did was put a little bit of Vallejo semi-gloss or satin varnish over the two main pulleys, and then used the Tamiya flat aluminum for the alternator, and then Tamiya titanium silver for the AC pulley. And then all the bolts were done in the Citadel Richard Herbert armor. Now that, to me, looks like a really interesting belt drive system. I mean, it's just really cool to look at. Again, something you'll never see once it's in the car, but it's just fun to do. And for me, building is all about getting the most fun and entertainment out of a model that I can. And that, for me, involves all of the detail work. Now, normally you could have just given this stuff a basic paint job and slapped it all together. It's a very simple engine, very easy to put together. But for me, adding the details and, you know, anything more that I can get out of it that I can do just extends the amount of build time and the fun for me in building these models. I figure I'm going to get my money's worth out of it, which means that I'm going to do everything I can to make this as realistic as possible. And that's fun for me. I mean, if you like just putting them together box stock and finishing them up, that's fine too. But as much as these things cost, I like to get as much of my money's worth out of them as I can. So anyway, let's get back to this build. Okay, now we're going to highlight these bolts because I just think it'll look cool if we do that. And then I've got to figure out where the spark plugs go because I forgot to drill the holes for the spark plugs. Okay, let's get our tiny little brush. Also a good idea to have multiple brushes of different sizes ready to go. Okay. All right, what do you guys think? Definitely is an improvement over all of that black, which gives us now a little more visually something to look at. I mean, I don't know how much of this you're going to see when it's all put together, but like I said, I just think it looks cool. Well, guys, apparently the oil filter, the opening is too small in it. So it's not going in. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work there. Alright guys, just a little tip. That oil filter housing, the oil filter may be a little too small to fit on the peg for the oil filter that it's supposed to mount on. So you may have to enlarge the opening on that oil filter, because as you saw, I launched it in the air and then I had to go and shut the camera off for a little bit while I found it and repeated a few expletives. So far that's been the only part of this build that was challenging. So let's keep putting this engine together. Alright guys, now the timing cover has one peg here where it attaches to the block, but even though it's just got that one peg, that's not going to center it on the block. So you just have to follow the shape of the block and match the timing cover to the shape of the block here, which is going to leave our motor mount hanging straight down in the center here. So once you get that lined up nice and straight, you should have no problem installing your timing cover and keeping the engine sitting straight. But we don't really know if this is going to fit normally, because we still don't know exactly how we're going to mount this engine into this car. So we may have to make some modifications. So right now we're just going to put it together and then we'll see where we go from there. Now we're going to let all of that dry and cure before we move on to the next step of attaching the belt drive system to the timing cover, because there's just too many little parts there that can move around and we don't want to risk knocking anything off before all the glue is cured. So we'll be back in a bit. Well, it'll be a bit for me. It'll just be a second for you guys. Alright guys, I hate to break it to you, but I lost battery power on the camera and couldn't get a chance to record wiring up the engine.
Oh no!
Now, I'll just describe it to you here. It was a little bit tricky, but we have all 4 cylinders in. We have our wire retainer there and everything attached right to the distributor. You can see if we can focus in on that. Let's see if we can get you in there. You see we have our spark plug boots in on the distributor, which let me see if I can give you a little light there. Let's see if we can see a little better. Our spark plug boots, our wires routed very similar to how it's routed on the real engine. Tried to get as close to that as possible. You can see our belt drive system is installed and attached to the engine, along with all the detail work that we've done there. You can see all the bolts just kind of pop out at you. I kind of like that. I also highlighted that part number on the engine there so that it stands out a little bit. A little bit of dry brushing there just to get that to pop out, because I kind of like that detail also. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I like the heat staining effect, really worked nicely on the manifold. And here we have the other side of the engine. Now, one thing I want to point out, I did make one mistake, and I mounted the throttle body backwards, which is a little too late to do anything about now because it's glued down in place. And you want to make sure you mount that in the right direction, because now my air cleaner assembly, you can see here it's got a peg. That peg is supposed to go into the peg on the valve cover, but now since it's just slightly off of where it's supposed to be, that peg doesn't reach the hole in the valve cover. So, I mean, easy enough fix. I'm just going to cut the peg and glue the air cleaner down to the top of the engine, but that's something I'm not going to do until I figure out how I'm going to get all of the detail work that's supposed to be on this engine, on the air cleaner and on the valve cover. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put a picture of it right here in case you guys forget exactly what I'm talking about. And this detail work here is what I want to get put on this engine. So I'm going to see if I can get some decals made up that'll replicate that, as I think that's the only way I'm going to get that to really give me the look I'm going for. Now, another thing I want to show you is we have the transmission. We still have to do a little bit of weathering to it. I'm going to run a little bit of shading on it, but you can see we have all of our bolts painted and highlighted on there, which I think looks very cool. I actually did that for the first time on a Ferrari Testarossa kit from Tamiya, I think it was, and the monogram. I did them both. And I highlighted the bolts, and I really like the way that looks, so I've been doing that ever since, as I think it just adds a load of detail and looks really cool when it's inside the car. So that's going to pretty much do it for the Fiero 4-cylinder. Whoops. I am very happy with the way it came out. Spark plug wires were a little tough to do on something this small, but I actually managed to get them in there and routed the way I wanted to, so I'm very happy with that. So now I'm going to leave it here for the Fiero 4-cylinder, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump on the engine for the Pontiac Super Stocker, because I just kind of want to see how that crazy exhaust manifold setup's going to work on that engine. And then we're going to go right to Mr. Mo's V8 on his GTO, because I still need a few more details. I'm probably going to have to call Mr. Mo. So if you're listening, Mo, I'm going to be giving you a call because I got a few questions about what's going on with your engine, so I can try and replicate everything that's in there. So that's it, guys. I'm going to end it here, and I will see you on the next episode. You got to come back because you got to see how that Super Stocker engine goes together. That's going to be fun. See you on the next one.